Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this local review body for Monday, the 8th of July, 2024. As always, we'll start with some introductions. I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the local review body, and I have with me today on my left, Councillor Richard Waters, and on my right, Councillor Grant Stewart. We are all by requirement members of the Planning and Placemaking Committee. To my far right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney. She is an independent planning advisor who's had no previous involvement with the applications on the agenda today prior to them being requested for review. To my left, beyond Councillor Waters, is Mr. Jeff Fogg. He's our legal advisor for today. And beyond him, Mr. Danny Williams, who is Democratic Governance Officer for this committee. So members, we'll now move to the second item on the agenda, which is declarations of interest. Councillor Waters, any interest?
No declarations of interest this morning.
And Councillor Stewart?
No declarations of interest.
Thank you both. Next item on the agenda is the minute from the last local review body, which was the 10th of June 2024. I'm happy to approve those, as I was the only member today who was on that committee. So happy to approve the minutes. So that now brings us to the main agenda for this afternoon. And we'll start with item 4.1, which is concerning the erection of a dwelling house, land 80 metres southwest of Gellibank Farm in Kinross. Mrs. Tierney, if you'd like to introduce for us.
There we go. Sorry about that. Right, thank you for that. So we'll just run through the slides with some information to start with. This is the location of the application site, and you'll see Kinross there, so just on the west side of the M90. Next slide, please. And then as we come in closer to the location of the site along the C458 road, I believe it is. The yellow square is the access down to Gellibank Farm and the other properties, and the application site is where the yellow star is. Next slide, please. And then zooming in closer to the location of the application site, which you can see within the yellow square there. The track goes on further to the west to Gellibank Farm itself and other properties. And as you come down the track, there are a number of other houses and agricultural and other buildings near the application site. Next slide, please. Some drawings that were submitted with the application. So the red line boundary includes the access from the main road down to the appeal site, and that's outlined in red there. You can see the other properties. Next slide. And then again, just a bit more detail there in terms of some of the existing passing places on the existing track, where new passing places would be formed, and drainage and ditches and so on. Next slide, please. And then this is a closer image, the red line site plan. Again, the access road is shown, the access track. And the site comes directly off the track there, directly into the site, with the house just at the kind of western edge of the within the red line site boundary, existing planting around the perimeter of the site and to the north. Next slide, please. This is effectively a location plan with the red line, but also shows the land within the ownership of the applicant, which is everything in blue. And then the other land is in separate ownership. Some images of the proposed design of the dwelling house, elevations. Next slide, please. And then this is some photographs. So this is the junction of the track as it meets the classified road. So the left photograph is the visibility to the south, and the right-hand image is the visibility to the north, and that's acceptable. And then this is as you come into the track, a bin area at the top of the track there, and then just as you come around the corner, there's another access into where there's permission for some holiday lodges. Next slide, please. And then again, just as you come down the track, at the top of the track on the left, coming further down the track on the right, you'll see there's been some improvements made to the track in terms of the surfacing of the track, and also some drainage improvements on the left-hand side. Next slide. And then this is as you come down to turn left or turn west towards Gellybank Farm, past some of the existing farm buildings. And the application site is just ahead of you there, behind that first farm building that you can see. And then this track on the right-hand side is kind of looking into where the other farm buildings are located, with the application site on the west side of that track. Next slide. And again, just coming a bit further back so you can see the other buildings nearby. The other dwelling houses are all further to the east. Next slide. And then this is just looking more closely into the application site with some of the existing boundary planting around the edges of the site. That's an existing gate, but that's not where the access into the site comes from. It comes from the track just around the corner. Next slide. Which is where the arrow on the left-hand side is. That would be the access point into the site, and the dwelling house would be located towards the west of the plot, where the other yellow arrow is. Next slide, please. The left-hand picture is the existing agricultural shed to the east. That's in the ownership of the applicant. And then the application site itself from further west along the track, looking back towards it. Again, existing boundary landscaping around the site. Next slide. And then again, just another image. So this is from the left-hand image is taken from down beside the existing farm buildings, looking back up towards the site. Probably just where that arrow is in the left-hand image is what you would describe as the newer planting that's not as long established as the other boundaries. And then the other image is of fencing, which is out with the application site towards the agricultural buildings, and the house would be located in behind that new planting. Next slide, please. This is the track as it heads up towards Gellybank Farm, and on the left there would be a new passing place formed. Next slide. And then this is as you come back from the application site, going back up towards the road. So a number of houses and other buildings on the left-hand side. And then as you turn back up towards the main road, the image there on the right, again with some of that improved track and drainage. Okay. So the proposal is for the erection of a dwelling house on a site to the west of a small group of rural buildings at Gellybank Farm in Kinross. Follows a previous refusal of 2 houses in October 2022. The appeal relates only to the southern half of that previously refused site for 1 house. The site is at the western end of an existing group of houses and other buildings, and accessed along an existing private access. The access to all the houses from the C458 class public road is deemed acceptable, and the visibility displays onto the road are maintained. This leads to the private track to all the properties and includes off it an access to an improved holiday home development. Where there have been concerns about the condition and suitability of the track, this has been upgraded and a sealed surface, and there is a storage area for bins at the entrance. The previous refusal identified concerns with the lack of visibility of 33 metres at the access point into the site from the track due to the presence of a large hedge, which may not be in the ownership of the applicant. The access into this site has been moved further west, but the presence of the hedge is not referenced on the submitted plans, and it is suggested that this may have been misunderstood by the applicant because reference is made to the hedge at the access onto the public road being cut back. Therefore, it's not clear if the required visibility display at the site can be formed and maintained on an ongoing basis. The reasons for refusal were, firstly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance, as the site is not part of an existing building group and cannot be considered to extend the group into a definable site, as the landscaping which has been planted along the northern boundary appears to have been planted with the sole purpose of creating a development site. The supplementary guidance explicitly states that fencing or young trees or hedging planted with the specific intention of creating a site will not be accepted as existing landscape features for the purpose of this supplementary guidance. The proposal also fails to meet any of the other categories of development outlined in the SG. Secondly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 9B of MPF 4, as the proposal is on a greenfield site and is not explicitly supported by policies of the Perth and Kinross LDP. The proposal also fails to meet any of the categories of development allowed by Policy 17, Rural Homes of MPF 4. Thirdly, the proposal is contrary to Policies 1A, 19 and 56 of the Perth and Kinross LDP and Policies 14C and 23 of MPF 4, which seek to ensure that an appropriate level of residential amenity for proposed dwellings is provided, and states that there is a presumption against the siting of noise-sensitive land uses near sources of noise generation. There is some doubt as to the existing level of use of the neighbouring livery yard and farm buildings, and the noise therefrom has the potential to impact detrimentally on the amenity of the proposed dwelling, and a lack of information in the form of a noise impact assessment has not been submitted to allow an assessment of this to be made. And finally, the proposal is contrary to Policy 60B, Transport Standards and Accessibility of the Perth and Kinross LDP and Policy 13 of MPF 4. There is a requirement for a 33-metre visibility splay to be created at the access from the site onto the private access. The existing hedge along the southern boundary of the site severely restricts visibility at the access points into the site, and no indication of suitable visibility splays have been submitted. Furthermore, the hedge does not appear to be located within the red line boundary, and therefore it would appear that it may not be in control of the applicant. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the only applicable category of Policy 19 is one building groups, defined as 3 or more existing buildings which appear as a group. The majority of the buildings should either be residential or be suitable to conversion to residential. They are also formed by existing topography, roads, or well-established existing landscape features, such as a watercourse or mature tree belt, which will provide a suitable setting. The site is not located within a building group, but adjacent to it. There is some landscaping on the western boundary, although this is partly due to the recent planting of some small-scale trees. There is also some rising topography adjacent to the western boundary. To the south, the site is defined by an existing access track, and therefore the site is partly defined. The northern boundary appears to have been planted in 2018. There are similar concerns with this application as those identified in the assessment of the previous application for 2 plots. The SG makes it clear what features can be used to enable a site to be considered defined. It states that fencing or young trees or hedging planted with the specific intention of creating a site will not be accepted as existing landscape features. The planting along the northern boundary appears to have been formed with the purpose of creating a site. The SG goes on to provide examples of where the extension of a building group can be accepted. Despite being raised under the previous application, and although the access into the site has been moved to the west, it is not clear if the hedge which impacts on the visibility from the site onto the private track and needs to be removed is in the applicant's ownership, as it's not within the red line and can therefore may not be able to be provided. It was questioned whether the visibility matter has been misunderstood, as it is not the access and hedge onto the public road which is the issue. It is the access and hedge into the site itself from the track. It is noted by roads that due to the makeup of the access, which includes posts and large rocks on the immediate boundaries, that there is limited opportunity for vehicles to pass on the track. This application proposes additional passing places between the public road and the entrance into the site, which is considered acceptable, in addition to the 2 existing passing places. And a 4th one is proposed beyond the site to the west. The objections about the maintenance of the track are private legal matters. There is an existing operational farm located to the east of the site, and this could detrimentally impact on the amenity of any house. It is also understood that it operates as a livery yard, although the applicant says this is not the case despite it being referenced in objections. When the site was visited, it appeared the buildings were in active use, perhaps even for other purposes, and the design and layout is acceptable, as is the phosphorus mitigation. So in terms of the case, from the applicant, they state that the site is a definable site and has good containment with well-established boundaries on all sides. The southern boundary is defined by a road, the western boundary is defined by the rising slope of the land and existing mature planting. The northern boundary has established tree planting along it, and to the east there is the existing building group. The planting to the north boundary was to reinforce the enclosure of the site, and this was carried out in late 2017. It was not carried out specifically to create a housing site, as it was considered that there was already a potential plot on this site along with long and well-established boundaries. There will be no adverse impact on residential amenity with regard to the status of the neighbouring farm and livery, as the new owners of the buildings have done away with this use. The previous consents at this location were permitted on the basis that they would not impact on the existing neighbouring residential amenity to the east. The proposed house to the west would therefore not prejudice the consented uses. The vehicular access to the site will not have a detrimental impact on road safety, as the visibility splayed from the site onto the track is within the appellant's land ownership, as shown in the ownership plan which was submitted with the appeal. In terms of other matters, there are 3 objections to the application, including from Kinrossshire Civic Trust, referring to a number of permissions the applicant and their family have received over the years for private residential and holiday accommodation, the latter granted in 2019 with little progress since, and that there will be a total of 8 houses and 8 holiday chalets on what was originally a farm with 1 farmhouse. The site has been landscaped to now look like 2 building plots with planting of trees and non-native species. The plot will be in isolation and does not sit next to the other houses. The drainage ditch on the farm is an open ditch at this point which struggles to cope with the amount of water after heavy rainfall, and the other side of the road is beginning to collapse. It should be refused for the same reasons as the previous application. There are ongoing issues with the access road. There used to be a community road fund prior to the applicant taking over the maintenance of the farm. The extra development should mean that the road should be upgraded to a tarmac surface with passing places. And concern is also raised about the suitability of the C-class public road the access comes off, as it's becoming increasingly busy and there are no designated parking places, passing places. There are known water pressure issues, and adding a further house will not help. The owners of the farm did put in a bin storage area, but it is already too small for the amount of bins, and adding further houses will only make this worse and cause a possible hazard to vehicles accessing the farm. There is reference to the proximity of farm buildings nearby, which are not in the ownership of the applicant, and this may cause an impact on residential amenity.
Thank you. We'll move on to questions. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. You've mentioned a couple of times about the visibility displays onto the track, and I think you've confirmed already that this is the visibility displays when you're coming out the proposed plot onto another private road. In relation to the legislation, is that covered? Because initial reading, I thought it was onto the main road, but you've said it isn't. Is that trying to think legitimate? Is that the proper interpretation of the policies within and the legal element? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think there's been a bit of dubiety and discussion here about the access onto the existing classified road that takes you down the track to all the properties, and then also the access from the private track into the plot itself. It does seem a little unusual that the Roads Department have commented on the visibility not being to standard from the private track into the house. And that is also a reason for refusal. You know, it's normally just if it's a classified road and the visibility doesn't meet requirements, that would be, you know, a concern. It may be that they've come at it from a point of view of safety in terms of wider kind of roads considerations rather than planning as such, perhaps.
Thank you. Just in one of the other things that seems to change is one of the maps you showed us, which has the blue area you had, which showed the plot within the ownership of the applicant for the initial planning application, and the separate, which was the yellow, and it shows the Livery riding school on the map I'm looking at, in separate ownership. You also mentioned in your that there would be a need for, if it was in use, there would be a need for a noise impact assessment if it was a farm in use. But it seems very ambiguous what is it a livery? Is it getting used as something else? Is it not getting used? What happens subsequently of this? Can somebody then, given it's not in the ownership of the applicant, then you know, there's nothing to stop somebody restarting that or whatever. How does that work in relation to the potential of a noise impact assessment or not having one?
Audrey, can we maybe go back to the map that's got the blue and yellow land ownership, please? Yeah. So the other buildings, both the one in their ownership and the ones to the north there that aren't, have been in agricultural or livery use. What the applicant is telling us is that they are no longer used for those purposes, and that's because the new owners of those buildings have said they're not using them for those purposes. But that's not to say they can't be used for those purposes, particularly agricultural building, because you don't need permission for that. So it's a legitimate request of the planning service to ask for a noise assessment as part of this application to ensure that if those buildings are in those uses, that they won't have a detrimental impact on the amenity for that dwelling house. Is that sufficient?
So just to confirm, the normal process would be, even if at that time they weren't getting used for that purpose, there would still be the need to have a noise impact assessment as if they were getting used for that purpose.
As part of this application, there needs to be a noise assessment on the basis that that is the permitted use, because that could still be the use. If it were to be used for something else in the future, they would then, the requirement for the noise assessment would be on the person who wanted to change the use of those buildings into something else.
That's perfect. I understand fully now. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart, any questions?
Thank you, Convener. I have a separate question, but I'd like to follow on from Councillor Waters to clarify. With a site visit, there's a paddock and a building across the track that's not on this map. Is that in use, do you know?
I do know. I did see that as well. I think it's outlined on. Maybe go back one image, Audrey, please. Or even the over. Yes. So opposite the site there, there's the grey area appears to be like a manege or some outdoor area. I mean that in itself does require planning permission, so I'm assuming it does have permission and it's in use for horses are using that.
Okay, thank you. It was just on the back of noise assessment, if that's buildings being used and that paddock area. Convener, can I come to my own question? It was just, could you help clarify I travelled along the eastern approach and passed a number of properties in a grouping, and in a kind of a linear grouping, and then we come to sort of like commercial, agricultural buildings. Then there's a large area of unused land. Then there's a track to the paddock area. Then there's the application site. The sort of agricultural building and the track to the livery, does that constitute a break in that sort of linear grouping?
I mean, in effect, I think the road probably does separate the application site from the other buildings, whether those are the houses further to the east or the agricultural and livery buildings closer to the site.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question myself, and I'm following on from Councillor Stewart's question. I think it's this clarification of a building group. In this instance, because my recollection of the original application, the previous application for two houses, there were two houses on this site. The three buildings which form the centre of the plot at the head, that doesn't form a group as such, is that right? Or is it because we're extending into a site which doesn't have a defined boundary? I just want to clarify around the idea of a group.
That's okay, Convener. I think it's really two things. One is whether it's a group that can be added to, and then does that then meet all the other criteria that define it being a well-established kind of grouping? So I think, as I said there in the presentation, and in the supplementary guidance, it's about the majority of the buildings in the group should either be residential or be suitable for conversion to residential. So you've got a line of residential properties, and then you've got at least one agricultural building. Now, I think where the SG comes from is that your buildings that are agricultural that would be converted would be more likely to be an old steading, for example. Now, that's not to say that that farm building couldn't be converted to a house, because you do, permitted development allows you to convert smaller agricultural sheds built before the end of 2019. So if it was built before the end of 2019, you potentially could convert that building to a house. But at the moment, it's clearly an agricultural use. There's two other buildings there to the north that are in agricultural or livery use, and you have the track to those buildings as well. You then have the issue of the containment of the site, I suppose, which planning have acknowledged does have some containment in terms of the criteria of the SG, but that northern boundary, which you probably better see in the right-hand image, is yes, there's landscaping there now because they've put that in, but that it's, you know, that's been put there to try and create more of an established boundary, and it's not really doing what the SG kind of requires.
This could be a difficult one to answer, because this is obviously a moot point in this, is this northern boundary. There's obviously a picket and wire fence there, and then there's some planting, which seems to have taken place in 2018, which the planners say it's not established enough to encompass the site. Is there a general rule of how long it should be there before it's established? Or is it how long's a piece of string, I ask?
People are perfectly entitled to put landscaping on their own ground. How long it would need to have been there for to add to it being, compliant in terms of the boundaries that are there, I probably can't answer that. But it comes back to the fundamental issue about the grouping in the first place, I would suggest.
Fine, thank you very much. Sorry, that was a difficult one, I know. Sorry. Right, members, we have no further questions. So, do we feel that we can proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Waters
Happy to proceed on this one.
and Councillor Stewart.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you both. I too am happy to proceed. So I'll start this one off. I have some concerns on this case. Obviously, there was a previous application on the same site for 2 properties, which was refused. We're now looking at just 1, but the reasons for refusal appear to have been very similar. I'm not entirely convinced about the need for the visibility displays as we've discussed. Maybe if we're going to proceed, it could be put as a condition. I don't know, but my concerns relate to this concept of whether or not it's a group and whether or not we're extending into an established site. The planning officers made it clear that they don't think it is, that fencing young trees or hedge planting is more an intention to create a site. We could argue that point, I suppose, but the real reason for refusal here is numbers 2 and 3, particularly number 2, which is the fact that this is effectively a greenfield site, which is not explicitly supported by policies of our Perth and Kinross local development plan, and also fails to meet any categories regarding the policy 17 rural homes of NPF 4. That to me is the overriding reason for refusal, but I think on this occasion I'm happy to stick with the other reason, which is the fact that it's not a definable site and doesn't extend the existing group. So and I think reason for refusal 3 is worth staying in as well. So my decision is to refuse the appeal on this case. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I agree. I agree with you that the reasons for refusal 1, 2, 3 would base my decision that to refuse the appeal. I do agree that I'm not sure on 4 and would quite happily have that removed, because should always be driving to the conditions, and if you're coming out onto a driveway onto a track, you would expect the speeds to be very slow on that track. And I'm not sure, as with the question, that is proper planning. So I would agree with you that I'm not sure that should be included, and would happily include that in my decision.
And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. I'm minded to refuse this application on the reasons 1, 2, 3, and like Councillor Waters and yourself, I am not so sure about reason 4. Thank you.
So, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision, and I think we all agree that reason for refusal number 4 should be deleted. Although I appreciate it's academic, but the decision is unanimous one to refuse. Thank you. Thank you, members. We'll now move on to item 4.2 today. This is alterations to a dwelling house at 41 Coltwood Holding, Campmuir, Bergari. And Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce this one for us.
Thank you, convener. We'll just go through the slides to start with. So yes, Campmuir there, south of Copenhagen, east of Burrelton. Next slide, please. And then as we zoom into Coltwood Holdings, number of properties along the 2 roads there, and the application site just at the junction of the 2 roads. Next slide, please. And then aerial image there of the house effectively on a large corner plot between the 2 roads. And you can probably see just there the roof plan shows the kind of the original house on the eastern side with the kind of pitched roof, hip roof, and an extension on the side there with a large flat roof area. Next slide. And then this is the red line application site, which outlines the ownership of the applicant and the application site. And then these are the elevations of the existing property. So you can see the original probably interwar kind of bungalow there with the hip roof and the chimneys. And then the later addition of the flat roofed extension with the hip sides to the side of the house. Next slide, please. And then these are the elevations of the proposed extension, which sits on top of the flat roof, existing flat roof extension to the side of the house, with a kind of gable end on one end, joins directly into the roof of the existing cottage. It will provide a bedroom and a bathroom upstairs. So the south elevation there, top left, is the elevation that faces the road. So the main alteration there is obviously the expansive roof and the solar panels and the kind of clear story glazed element on the top of the gable. And on the rear, the bottom left image there is the north elevation, which shows the kind of large box dormer with a slight pitch on the top of it. Next slide, please. And then this would be the existing roof plan on the top left, and the ground floor plan, and then what you would see now in terms of the first floor that's being created on the top right image there, with a stair that comes up from the existing ground floor up through the clear story cupola element to provide the access to the bedroom and the bathroom, which is being created within the roof space of the extension. Next slide, please. There's some visuals of what the proposed extension would look like. There's one there, and then there's a number of other kind of 3D images here which show the proposal as well from front, back and side. Next slide. And then some photos of the existing property. So this is the front of the property as you access the drive to the house from the road. Next slide. And then as you come round to the front of the property, you can see the original cottage and then the later extension on the side. Next slide. And then looking back towards the extension and the access into the plot. Next slide. And again, the other side of the front view of the property. Next slide. And this is the end of the existing side extension at the moment that would become the kind of gable end feature. Next slide. And then moving around towards the back of the property where the dormer would be located on the rear. Next slide. This is just the same extension as you move up the driveway towards the back of the house. Next slide. And then the house is behind the hedge there, and behind the trees on the left-hand side. You can probably just make out the slate roof of the house. It's quite set back from the road with the grass there and then the hedge along the front. Next slide. This is looking back towards the west, towards Cooper Angus Road, neighbouring properties on the same side of the road. Next slide. Building directly across the road, a farm building, potato boxes, etc. Next slide. And then this is a view over to the fields, which are to the rear of the property. And some of those other houses are located along the road that runs along to the north. So in terms of an introduction, as you can see, the property is a detached cottage in the rural hamlet of Campmuir. The existing house has a hipped roof with an existing flat roofed extension on its west side, which has slated pitch sides. The extension facilitates a stair from the existing ground floor up to the extra bedroom and bathroom in the extension formed on top of the existing flat roof, along with a cupola formed with a pitched roof, a gable end, clear story glazing and a large box dormer window on the rear. A number of solar panels would be located on the front road facing elevation. Campmere is characterised by houses of varying designs and sizes, more single story than two story, and with mostly generously proportioned gardens. The reason for refusal is that by virtue of its uncharacteristic gable end, disproportionately long ridge length, bulky dormer window, which projects above the roof ridge, and incongruous clear story feature, this would unbalance and distort the character and appearance of the hip-roofed bungalow to the detriment of its visual amenity. Approval would therefore be contrary to policies 14 and 16G of MPF 4, policies 1A and 1B, C and G of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, and in Perth and Kinross's Council's Placemaking Guide 2020, which seek to ensure that developments contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding environment in terms of design, proportions, shape, form and appearance in order to respect the character and amenity of the place. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, it's considered that the gable end unbalances and distorts the character and appearance of the existing hipped roof house. The ridge length of the extension would also significantly exceed that of the existing house, resulting in a disproportionate appearance. The formation of a high-level, clear-story cupola and large box dormer window, both of which project above the roof ridge, would emphasise the incongruous nature of the extension to the detriment of its visual amenity. Although it's appreciated that the houses in the surrounding area do vary in design and proportions, any extension to this house should be respectful to the host building. Council's Placemaking Guide 2020 states that extensions should respect the shape, scale and proportions of the existing building. In most cases, an extension should be a subordinate addition in all respects. Detailing is key to the successful integration of designs for extensions. It is important that roof extensions and alterations fit with the local street character. The proposed development would not have an adverse impact upon surrounding residential amenity in terms of overlooking or overshadowing, given their relative positions, orientations and distances. So in terms of the case from the applicant, they refer to the original pattern of development having changed in the last few years, and the types of houses which have been built are all different. The agricultural shed across the road impacts on the street scene already. There is no common street frontage or building line. The application addressed the points made in the pre-application response. The existing flat-roofed and hipped extension is already incongruous. The north elevation faces the countryside and it's not visible from the front and does not impact on visual or residential amenity. The gable end with the pitched roof at the other is not uncommon in areas, and examples are given of varying house styles and designs. The existing footprint of the house is unchanged and the new roof is shorter than several neighbouring houses. To say it is disproportionately long is misleading. The clear-story skylight allows for internal headroom to reach the upstairs bedroom and provides an interesting visual feature. The dormer is barely noticeable and not bulky, is set back from the wall head, is contained within the roof pitch, does align with the lower story windows and is less than 1/3 of the length of the roof plane. The solar panels are naturally on the south elevation, and the proposal generally improves the property, which isn't in a conservation area, and there are no nearby buildings of architectural merit. And in terms of other matters, there's no other objections or comments on the application.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, any questions?
Thank you, Convener. We can see that this is an application for an extension on top of an extension. And I was thinking about the large dormer window area, which will be at the rear of the building. From a site visit, would I be right in thinking that there'd be minimal visual impact from local properties?
In terms of the dormer on the rear?
Yes.
I would say the properties sufficiently, there's no properties at the back that directly face onto or rear onto the property. And any view of it would be quite distant from the other houses that go from the road to the north.
And if I may, convener, on sort of the same idea, the south not the south elevation, the elevation to the side facing north, would there be any visual impact from the properties to the north? Because I was aware that there was sort of garage areas.
Audrey, could we maybe call up some of the plans with the elevations and the floor plans, please?
It's actually the west elevation. I also don't know my compass.
Audrey, if you go to the slide before that one for me, please. Oh, and again. So the image on the right shows the dwelling house, the driveway, and then the existing domestic outbuildings before you get to the boundary of the property, the mutual boundary of the property with the neighbouring cottage. So there is quite a distance between the end gable and the neighbouring property.
Thank you.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just on a roughly same line, but the glazed tower skylight type feature on the building, and from an overlooking perspective, now that as far as I can work out looks like it's above a staircase, which is kind of enclosed with a door that goes into a bedroom. But just on the ability overlooking neighbours to the west, from that one can you see out it? Is it really a skylight? And this is a very difficult bit to judge with the drawings. You know, are people able to look out of that across to the houses to the west, or is there enough? Is it a proper skylight that is above the head height that people can look out of? And it's a bit unclear, or I'm certainly struggling to understand it.
Audrey, can you go down to number 8, please? Or the one before it, even. Okay, so the top right image is the first floor plan, which is as you come up the stairs onto the landing that would take you into the bedroom, and you would then have the clear story glazing. You would be able to see out of that, but it would only be at your kind of head height, and you're also standing back from it because you're onto the landing that leads into the bedroom. So you're not going to be right up against the glazing. You're going to be standing back from it. And also, I can't give you a measurement, but I think you're a good number of meters away from the mutual boundary with the neighbouring property as well, over the roof of the existing kind of outbuildings between the two properties. I could try and give you a measurement if it would help.
No, I think I got a rough idea. And I assume the glazed bit goes right around to the north element of that as well, rather than the west. So you could still be on the landing and look north or northwest, or south and southwest. So you could still be right against the glazing at these sides. Right. Thank you.
I have no questions, but Councillor Stewart, do you want to come back?
Thank you, convener. I think Councillor Waters has touched on my question, but maybe I could come to the ridge line, the new extension. The dormer is going to be slightly raised above the ridge line of the original property. Would that have much visual impact when walking and driving along the sort of Burlton Abernight Road?
Audrey, if you, could you go back to the one with the proposed elevations, please? Up a couple. Yeah, this one. So the south, the top left south elevation is what you would see from that. That's the road facing elevation. The bit of the dormer that you see is kind of just that line that you see above the yes, thank you, above the solar panels there. So so although it's a dormer on the rear, you are seeing that element of it from the front of the property. I mean, all I can say is it is set back a good bit from the road. It's probably high enough that you would see it, even though there's a hedge around the front of the property and so on.
Thank you.
Members, can we now proceed then to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Waters.
Happy to proceed, convener.
And Councillor Stewart.
Happy to proceed, convener.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Waters, can you start us off on this one?
I think this is a bit of it's a bit of a tough one on the design, but on this occasion I am going to stick with the officer's recommendation and reasons for refusal that it will affect the character and amenity of the area, especially with the bulky dormer window projecting above the roof bridge and the skylight type glass element on the gable end as well.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. I recognise that we are building an extension on a for its time extension in its day, the original extension. I kind of feel that the extension does kind of fit in with many properties in the area. However, I agree with the council officers about the incongruous clerestory feature. So in this moment, I am going to refuse this application.
Thank you both. My decision is going to be academic, I suppose, but on this occasion, my thoughts were along to grant the appeal. The extension is already existing, so we're actually, as you questioned, we're building up rather than building along. There are houses along there of different designs, different styles. The clerestory, I think, is in my mind, is an attractive feature, to be honest. Something different. My concern, I suppose, was the dormer. It is considerable. It is above the roof line, but my feelings were that it was at the back and therefore wouldn't be seen very clearly from the front of the property. There's no objections from neighbours. So I was of the opinion that there were sufficient conditions in this case to depart from planning policy. But I appreciate I'm in the minority in this one. So, Mr. Fogg, we have a majority decision in this case, 2-1. My two colleagues have agreed with the planning officers, whereas I have departed from that decision. Anything else we need on that one? Okay. Thank you, members. We'll move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is number 4.3. This is alterations and extension to a dwelling house and formation of raised patio at Ockhill Cottage, Main Street, Glenfarg. Mrs. Tierney, again, if you could introduce the case.
Thank you, convener. I'll just run through the images first. So location of the site is in Glenfarg, just off the main street there, and you can see the M90 to the immediate east. Next slide. And then just kind of zooming in on the appeal site, number of properties that run along Main Street itself, and over to the rear there, a number of other houses along Ash Grove and Elm Road, and it's through those roads that you can access the rear of the property. Next slide. So the red line of the application site is delineated here on one of the drawings. So you can see it's one half of a pair of semis. Next slide. And then just coming closer in, the application site itself and the other half of the semi to the north, and a number of other residential properties round about on Main Street and Elm Row at the back. Next slide. This is the existing floor plan and roof plan of the property. So the existing traditional cottage at the front, which faces onto Main Street, and then the existing extension at the rear with the large kind of hip roof element there, and accommodation over a couple of floors within the existing extension. Next slide. And then this is the proposed floor layouts in terms of the roof plan, which shows the gable end and the flat roof element. You've got the lower ground element in the middle there, which is to create a family dining area through to a utility area, and then stairs that lead you upstairs to a further bedroom and a bathroom. And on the middle slide there, you can see an outside terrace area as well, that comes straight out from what would be the ground floor and then access down to the garden. Next slide. This is the existing rear and side elevation of the property on the top there, with a large kind of hip roof. And then we've got the proposed elevations on the bottom there. The bottom left is the one that adjoins the other half of the semi-detached cottage. You've got the rear elevation in the middle, and then the other side elevation that faces the property to the south at the bottom right. Next slide. And then some photographs. As you can see, the traditional cottage that faces onto Main Street with the pavement directly outside, and then the rear garden area at the back and the access into the property. Next slide. This is the existing extension, quite a bulky extension of its time, probably. The one on the right shows you the existing property on the north side, so you can see it's been extended with various extensions in the past as well. Next slide. And then these are just some closer up images of the property to the north side with its extensions. You can see the proximity of the extensions on the neighbour's side to the boundary, and where the existing extension on the appeal site comes to, an existing fence between the two. Next slide, please. This is the side of the property that faces the property to the south. Now you can see, I'll try and explain it. I mean, the cottage itself is at road level at Main Street, but the garden area of the property in Elm Row is at a much lower level at the back. So the internal floor space of the extension as exists, and which is as proposed, is already up a flight of steps to tie in with the levels of the existing cottage. So at the moment you come in up a flight of steps to get into the ground floor of the existing property, and that would be the same with the extension. And on the left there you can see the property to the south, which is set back quite a bit, and the existing hedging and trees along that mutual boundary. Next slide. Then as you look south along Main Street, you can see the properties either side and where the appeal site is. And then on the right hand side there, you can see as you go north up Main Street, You can see the neighbouring property to the south is set back quite a bit from the road and behind hedges and trees. And then you can see the appeal site with the cottage up to the roadside. And the extension would be where that yellow arrow is, and it would come up to ridge height level. So you would get glimpses certainly of the side of the extension there. Next slide. Okay. So the site, traditional semi-detached 1.5-storey house situated on Main Street within a residential area of Glenfarg. The house is accessed and is visible from Elm Row to the rear. An existing 1.5-storey extension on the rear is to be removed with a 2-storey extension and raised patio going in its place. Reasons for refusal. Firstly, the proposal, by virtue of its design, siting, scale and finishing materials, would have a detrimental impact on the traditional character of the existing house, and it would not complement its surroundings. Approval would therefore be contrary to Policy 16GI, Quality Homes of National Planning Framework 4, contrary to Policies 1A and 1B (C), placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, and contrary to the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Supplementary Guidance 2020. Secondly, the proposal, by virtue of the overlooking from the window on the south elevation and the overlooking from the raised patio, would have a detrimental impact on the residential amenity of the neighbouring properties to the north and south. Approval would therefore be contrary to Policy 16G2, Quality Homes of MPF 4, contrary to Policy 17, Residential Areas of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, and contrary to the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Supplementary Guidance 2022. Thirdly, the proposal, by virtue of the scale of the extension and its proximity to the boundary, would result in overshadowing of the residential property to the north. Approval would therefore be contrary to Policy 16G2, Quality Homes of MPF 4, contrary to Policy 17, Residential Areas of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, and contrary to the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Supplementary Guidance 2020. And finally, the proposal, by virtue of the scale and design of the extension and its proximity to the boundary, would have an overbearing physical impact on the residential property to the north. Approval would therefore be contrary to Policy 16G2, Quality Homes of MPF 4, contrary to Policy 17, Residential Areas of the Perth and Kinross LDP2, and contrary to the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Supplementary Guidance 2020. So in terms of design and amenity, the extension is a 1.5-storey gabled pitched roof of white render on the south closest to Elm Row. The eaves of the new extension would be more than 1 metre higher than existing. On the north side, nearest the other half of the semi, there is a flat roof 2-storey section using grey stone walls to the ground floor and timber cladding to the first floor walls. This mix of design, heights and shapes results in an incongruous design which dominates the real elevation of the house and which detracts from its traditional character. Due to its height and width, the proposed extension will obscure most of the traditional walls and eaves and much of the traditional roof on the rear of the existing house. Notwithstanding the style of the current extension, the existing house has overhanging eaves, and the pitched roof design of part of the extension has clipped eaves, which fails to respect the character of the existing house. The height of the ridge of the pitched roof section matches the ridge of the existing house and is above the height of the dormers on the front elevation. Setting the ridge lower would have given a degree of subordination to the house. There is also only a minimal 0.3 metres set back of the extension from elevation of the house. Although the current rear extension is partially seen from Main Street, it is not visually obtrusive due to its lower ridge and eaves height and hip roof. The extension would be more visually prominent when approaching the property from the south along Main Street. The proposed raised patio is 1 metre above ground level and will be almost the full width of the extension, which increases the dominance of the proposed extension. In terms of residential amenity, with regard to the other half of the semi located to the north side, the height and depth of the extension would have an overbearing physical impact. The proposed patio is 1.5 metres from the mutual boundary with the house to the north and faces the rear garden and a window on the south elevation of that property. The existing boundary treatments do not provide adequate screening between the properties, particularly when the raised floor levels are taken into account. The proposal will therefore result in overlooking. The window on the south elevation of the extension faces the rear garden and side windows of the neighbour to the south. The window on the proposed extension is less than 3.5 metres from the boundary, and it has a sill height of approximately 1 metre above the internal floor level, despite it having the appearance of a high-level window. The proposed raised patio is also less than 3.5 metres from this mutual boundary. The height, 6.5 metres, length 4 metres, and distance from the mutual boundary to the north, 1.2 metres, will result in a loss of light to the south-facing window on the ground floor of the neighbouring house, as specified in the supplementary guidance. In terms of the case by the applicant, the existing house extension is unpleasant and makes the house dark, and it's not well connected to the garden. The contemporary design will provide for more light and for caring for children and parents. The house is traditional to the front, but is not listed or in a conservation area. With regard to the first reason for refusal, the mass and scale takes cognizance of the existing house. The pitched roof elements broadly replicate what exists, and the other elements break up the mass of the design. The flat roofed area is to be subservient to the rest, and all elements integrate together sympathetically. The flat roofed area also seeks to lessen any impact on the adjoining neighbour to the north. The distance it protrudes is only marginally larger than existing and does not extend any further into the garden than the existing extension to the adjoining property. The existing extension has a contrasting material, and the neighbour at 2 Elm Row to the south has white rough cast. Some stone is used to tie in with the rough cast, and the timber will be stained grey. With regard to reason for refusal 2, the window on the south elevation is obscured by the existing boundary planting. This planting will also screen the proposed outside terrace. The door onto the terrace on the north side is for a utility area only, and there is a tall fence and vegetation separating the two halves of the parking already. With regard to the third reason for refusal, this concerns overshadowing, and the daylight report seeks to address this. It is only Glenard to the north which is affected. This is the area of ground closest to the building, and the majority of the garden is unaffected. With regard to the fourth reason for refusal, it is disputed that there is an overbearing impact on the neighbour, and they do not object to the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go on to questions. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. I don't really have any questions just now on this one. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. When we were talking about overlooking to the property to the south, it's an omission on my part. The planting that is described to be screening the window in the patio area, does that planting belong in the Ochil cottage or the property to the south?
I think there's certainly some of it is definitely within the boundary of the applicant, probably some of the slightly taller trees. The hedge is probably more likely to be a mutual ownership.
Thank you. So it isn't beyond the realms of possibility that if you're trying to get more sunlight into your garden, that's a south facing that could be taken down at some point to allow more light into the garden area.
It could be, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I think you pretty much asked my question, Councillor Stewart. So, members, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
Happy to proceed, convener.
Councillor Waters.
Happy to proceed, convener.
I'm happy to proceed. So, Councillor Stewart, if you could start us off on this one.
Thank you, convener. As Councillor Waters alluded to earlier, this is very difficult matter, these extensions. We recognise that we are dealing with a traditional, beautiful cottage and trying to bring it into, we've got an extension, and yet again, trying to replace another extension, trying to bring a home into sort of contemporary realms of flexible, modern family living. However, in this instance, I am going to have to agree with the Perth and Kinross Council officers with regards to all the reasons muted about, particularly the scale, and I was alluded to earlier about the extension becomes more of the property than the original cottage. So I'm minded to refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor. As you say, the extensions to properties are always difficult to judge. And in this instance, the existing extension is obviously somewhat old and not aesthetic to the building, I think, and could reasonably be replaced. But I do agree with you on this occasion that the scale of this particular extension is somewhat large, and will, in my mind, overwhelm the house. An extension could be put on there. I think the existing one could be replaced, but I think the design of this needs to be improved. And I think, as has been mentioned by officers, the height of it, the ridge height, needs to be lowered to make it subservient to the existing property. So on this occasion, I'm going to have to refuse the appeal. I would consider perhaps refusals 3 and possibly 4 to be deleted, but we'll discuss that perhaps a bit later. Councillor Waters, your thoughts?
Thank you, convener. Fully agree. The current extension is quite bulky in its own right, and not aesthetically very pleasing. And you know, there is deputations over the practicalities of it, which I fully agree with. The design on reasons for refusal, I will concur with officers. Not everything. I think the finishing materials have no issues with. I think some of the design, apart from the sighting and the scale, I would say are you know, appropriate for the area. But I'm afraid I would still have to agree with the officers' decisions and go for refusal in this case.
So, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision to refuse. I was considering removing reasons 3 and 4. I'm not sure about what my colleagues think about that, but I'll leave it with them for the moment. I'm happy to go with the majority. So, I think there was some question about the overshadowing on the property to the north.
Mr. Which of the reasons?
Numbers 3 and 4.
For you would be.
I'd be inclined to delete those off, but as I say,
not for reasons.
Not for reasons 3 and 4. So it's down to my colleagues if they feel along the right lines or whether they wish to.
I think they're still, personally, I think they're still relevant in the refusal.
Okay, and Councillor Stewart.
As I alluded to, I think not against the extension, but I think the scale, and if you take the logical conclusion, 4 is still definitely applicable, and the scale also has an impact in overshadowing. Thank you.
Yeah, on that basis, Mr. Fogg, forget what I was saying. We'll go with a unanimous decision to refuse. Yeah. Right, members, thank you very much. We'll now move on to number 4.4, which is the erection of a replacement dwelling house and associated works at 42 Muir End Road in Perth. Sorry.
Well, if we could go back to the previous one, I did understand Councillor Waters, I think it was, saying that he, for his part, didn't have an issue with the finishing materials, which was a component of the first reason. Was that something which you are all agreed?
Yes, I would agree with that. No problem.
I concur.
So under the first reason for refusal, it would be as in the original, but under deletion of the reference to finishing materials. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So we now move to number 4.4, erection of a replacement dwelling house and associated works at 42 Muir End Road. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce.
Thank you, convener. Application site here, central residential area within Perth. Next slide, please. And as you zoom closer in, you can see, yes, area very much dominated by residential properties and some open space to the south of the site. Next slide. And as you zoom in on the property itself, just outlined in yellow there, existing single-storey property, very similar in terms of scale, design, plot ratio to the surrounding properties. Next slide, please. And then this is the red line is the application site boundary. The blue line to the property next door means that's also in the applicant's ownership. Next slide. And then that's the outline in red of the existing footprint of the existing bungalow on the site. Next slide. So this is the proposed floor plans of the proposed dwelling house, substantial property over 2 stories with various bedrooms and other accommodation, parking to the front of the property. Next slide, please. And then these are the elevations. So the south elevation, top left, is the elevation that faces Muir End Road. And then we've got the east elevation to the top right, west elevation bottom right, and then the rear elevation to the north at the bottom left there. Next slide. Sorry, my apologies. These are the some 3D images. Oh, next slide, please, Audrey. These are the 3D images of the proposal. So you can see the 2-storey dwelling house, the wings at the back of the property, the front elevation with the garage area at the front. Next slide, please. This is the existing, the photographs now we'll move to. This is the existing bungalow. Single-storey bungalow, access directly off Muir End Road. Next slide, please. And then kind of zooming back, you can see the surrounding properties on either side of the application site. Next slide, please. And again, as you move further along Muir End Road, you can see the roof of the existing bungalow there. Next slide. And then this is looking from the other side of the property as you move west along Muir End Road with the driveway of the neighbouring property at the front of the slide there. Next slide, please. And looking at the existing front elevation that faces Muir End Road with the existing garage and over carport area, covered area between the garage and the house. Next slide, please. And then this is another view of the front there, looking more towards the other neighbouring property, an existing hedge between the two. Next slide, please. That's just a closer image of the neighbouring property on the west side. Next slide, please. And then this is as you move around towards the back of the application site through the past the garage area, which is the image on the left, and then the image on the right is around the other side of the house with the gable of the other dwelling house next to the hedge. Next slide, please. And then this is the open space parkland area to the immediate south of the application site. Next slide. This is the rear of the property from both sides of the garden, east and west. Next slide. And then this is the front driveway that faces Muir End Road and the access onto Muir End Road. Next slide, please. And then this is a view of some of the other properties on Muir End Road, on the other side of the road, and the top image there on the same side of the road, on the bottom right-hand image there. And then these properties are on the north side of Muir End Road, opposite the application site. So this proposal is for the erection of a replacement dwelling house at 42 Muir End Road, Perth. The site is within a residential street bound by dwellings to the east, west, north, and to the south is open space. The existing house is a single-storey dwelling with detached garage and carport. The proposal is to demolish the house and erect a new, larger 1.5-storey dwelling. There are two reasons for refusal. Firstly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 17, residential areas of the Perth and Kinross Council Local Development Plan 2, as the proposal is considered to represent an overdevelopment of the site when taking account of the area's environs, established building heights and surrounding house types. As a consequence, the development is incompatible with the character and amenity of the area. And secondly, the proposal is contrary to NPF 4 Policy 14, Design Quality and Place, and LDP 2 Policy 1 Placemaking and related placemaking supplementary guidance, as the development would not contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment. The design and resultant height of development does not respect the character of development in the locality. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the principle of replacing a house within the settlement boundary is acceptable. However, policies 1A and 1B state that development should contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment and respect the character and amenity of the place. Development should also complement its surroundings in terms of appearance, height, scale, massing, materials, finishes and colours. The Council's associated placemaking supplementary guidance also provides further guidance. The existing house is a single-storey, modest in scale, and has a low-pitched roof, approximately 4.6 metres high, reflecting the wider character of development in the area. In particular, the houses on either side are directly comparable in terms of height, mass, and design. The replacement house is 7.6 metres high, of a substantial mass, and is higher and with large projections, and does not reflect the existing character of development in the area, and its design and form is contrary to policies 1A and 1B, supplementary guidance, and Policy 17 of the Perth and Kinross LDP. The proposal would therefore be a considerable increase in height and be out of character with the street scene, and it's doubtful if more than a single storey in appearance dwelling could be accommodated here. No further assessment of overshadowing of neighbouring properties has been carried out due to the fundamental issue with the unacceptable nature of the design. In terms of the case that has been put forward by the applicant, they have noted some frustration at the handling of the application, but this has been duly responded to by the Planning Service. It is not considered that the proposal and the site has been looked at. It is considered that the proposal and site has been looked at in isolation and has not fully considered all the surrounding dwellings and character of the area. Muir End Road has a number of house types, including some two-storey and some gable-fronted. It is suggested that the proposal is not overdevelopment of the site and is of a similar scale to neighbouring houses, giving the examples of the house at number 52 at 7.4 metres high and numbers 35 and 37 at 7 metres in height. And they've also stated that the plot ratio is similar to other houses on the road at 20%. In terms of other matters, there were 8 letters of representation received. 6 were in support, but 2 objected to the design, height, overshadowing, and noise from the proposed heat pump. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to questions. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. Much has been made about the height and on a site visit. And some of the examples used by that there are different heights within the area. But if we move north, the topography seems to be falling away from the application site, and the 2 stories seem at a lower level because of the topography. Was that your understanding when you had a visit?
Thank you, councillor. Yes, so as you move from the south to the north, the properties on the south side of Muir End Road are, generally speaking, single-storey bungalows. They're at a higher level than the other side of the road, so you tend to find, although there's 1 or 2 slightly, a couple of taller houses on the south side of Muir End Road further along, but you generally find on the other side of the road, which is at a lower level to the south, that the houses are slightly taller. They would contain accommodation over 2 floors, but they would, they're effectively, the second floor of accommodation is in the roof as well.
Thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just staying on the height issue, there is some information in our submissions that show some of the other houses are a similar-ish height, but they do seem to be all the 1.5, 1 3/4 type style houses. Is there any other 2-story houses within that area?
Thank you, councillor. The other properties on the other side of the road are 2 stories, or they're 2 floors of accommodation within the property, but the second floor is contained within the roof. The properties that you might describe as 2 stories, then with the roof on top of that, which is the same as this proposal, there aren't any that look like that. The nearest I could find was, if you go to the 3rd last slide, Audrey, please, which is further along Muir End Road to the west. Next one. The property on the bottom right there, which is obviously quite a substantial footprint of a property, accommodation over 2 floors, with probably the height of that house would be the tallest within the immediate environment in the street scene there.
Thank you. Is that in a bigger plot? Is it in a larger plot, that one? Do we know?
Sorry, Audrey, please, could you go to number 5? I can't tell you exactly what number that property is, but as you go to the west, so you see the application site is narrower, but it's longer. And as you go along Muir End Road, the plots probably widen, but they get shorter. So in terms of the amount of space each plot has, they're probably still all very similar.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, members. Just to clarify, the properties around this site, They're all single story or single story with extension into the roof. Is that correct?
The houses that are directly adjacent to the two houses either side are bungalows. As I say, that 2-story house is further along Muir End Road. The properties on the north side are what you would call 1.5 stories. They have 2 floors of accommodation, but they're 1.5 stories because the second floor of accommodation is contained within the roof. Those ones.
Thank you. Okay, members, are we then able to proceed now to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Waters
Happy to proceed, convener.
and Councillor Stewart.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. I have some concerns about this particular application, to be honest. We mentioned the height, which is part of it, but it's the massing of the site and the scale which concerns me. Looking at the 3D drawing on page 283 of our pack gives an indication of what it would be like. It seems to me that this height, one part of it, but it's more perhaps the whole scale of the building which is of concern to me. And it would seem to me, in my mind, having visited the road, be out of place with the surrounding buildings. And on that basis, I feel I would have to concur with the officer's decision in this case to refuse the appeal on the basis of what the refusals that they have listed here, both numbers 1 and 2. As I say, it's the height of the building is part of it, but it's the massing of the building in its location. I'm sure it's a suitable house in itself, but in its location, I feel it's wrong, and therefore will actually refuse the appeal. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I would agree with you and go for a refusal with this. And seems out of place. The type of house that is being proposed for here does not fit in with any of the other houses within the area. And on that point, I will concur with officers.
And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. I'm also like-minded to refuse this with both yourself and Councillor Waters' expression about not the new build and the contemporary styling, but I think it's the mass and the relationship with the local housing. So I'm minded to refuse this application.
Thank you both. Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision to refuse on this one. Thank you. So members will now move on to number 4.5, which is the erection of a holiday accommodation unit and silver shed and associated works, land at Farrick, Lewsgate, Rannoch, that's how you pronounce it. But I'll leave with you, Mr. Tierney. You correct me as you go along.
Thank you for introducing that, convener. So that we'll just go through the slides to start with. But yes, general location very far west there, at Bridge of Gore, I'm going to say, Gower. Next slide, please. Again there, Joe, so just zooming in slightly on the location of the property. Next slide, please. And you can just make out the red line application site boundary there between the road and the river to the south of the site. Next slide, please. And then this is a much more detailed site plan of the proposal. Quite a large site with a lot of open areas of ground, but as you can see, the proposed building to the kind of northwest of the application site, closest to the road rather than the river to the south. Next slide, please. And again, another detailed drawing, which is kind of concerns all the other constraints on the site in terms of trees, drainage, levels, and the location of the property and the access in off the main road. Next slide, please. Floor plan of the proposed holiday accommodation with the 3 bedrooms there and the open plan living space. It's all on one level. Next slide, please. And these are some of the elevations of the property as well. And then the next slide shows you, I think, some kind of artist impressions of the property, which give you possibly a better impression rather than the elevational drawings. Again, as you can see, the property set back up towards the road with the open area to the side and to the front down towards the river. Next slide. Some more 3D images there. And then these are the images of the site. So this is the existing access from the road into the site. This is looking east. And then these images are all looking in the opposite direction to the west and show the existing access off the road. Next slide, please. And this is now looking back from within the application site, from the more open area back up towards the access and the main road. And then this is from within the site looking towards the east, a kind of open area and some of the existing planting within the wider site. Next slide, please. And then this is as you, this is really the location of the property as you look west, and with the fencing there just running along the roadside. Next slide, please. And then this is now coming down into the site towards the south, down towards the river, and then towards the southwest. And then this is the more open area down towards the river to the front of the property. Next slide, please. And then this is as you move further down towards the river, looking back up into the application site. And the building would be where the right photograph there, where that tree is on the left-hand side and the existing kind of shed, it would be in that open area in the middle there. Next slide, please. These are just more images of the application site looking from the riverside back up towards the road. Next slide. And then this is right down beside the river, looking west and east. Next slide. So by way of introduction, there was a previous application on the site, and that was refused. And that was the same proposal to erect a new holiday home on this rural site outside Rannoch. The proposed building is modern in design and single storey. There would be an ancillary outbuilding and other associated works. The site is located within several landscape and environmental designations and is immediately adjacent to the River Gore, which is part of the River Tay Special Area of Conservation, and within the River Tay Basin Catchment Area. There are known protected and local wildlife in the area. Since the previous refusal, some additional technical information in relation to flooding, drainage and ecology has been submitted, and as well as an updated supporting statement. 4 reasons for refusal. Firstly, that the site is located out with any settlement boundary identified within the adopted Perth and Kinross LDP2, and the proposed holiday accommodation unit does not relate to an expansion of an existing business or a new business that is connected to an existing site-specific resource or opportunity. The proposal is therefore contrary to the specific requirements of Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, of the adopted Perth and Kinross LDP2, which only allows for new rural businesses in the open countryside in certain circumstances. 2, as the proposal is on a greenfield site which has not been allocated for development within the adopted Perth and Kinross LDP2, and the proposal is not explicitly supported by policies in the Perth and Kinross LDP2, the proposal is contrary to policy 9B, brownfield, vacant and derelict land and empty buildings of the National Planning Framework 4. Thirdly, it has not been demonstrated that the site is not at risk from flooding. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 22, Flood Risk and Water Management of MPF 4, and Policy 52, New Development and Flooding of the adopted Perth and Kinross LDP 2, both of which state that new development should not take place on areas which are at risk of flooding. And finally, the proposal does not include any of the uses listed in Part A of Policy 29 Rural Development of MPF 4, which specifically includes the diversification of an existing business, and due to flood risk, the proposal is inappropriately cited. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 29 Parts A and B of MPF 4, as the development fails to meet some of the key criteria required for new development in rural areas. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, in terms of MPF 4, biodiversity is placed front and centre of all planning decisions through Policy 3, and Policy 4 looks to protect our environmental assets and designations from inappropriate new development. Support for new rural development in suitable locations is offered through Policy 29, Rural Development, and encouragement for new tourism development and opportunities is offered by Policy 30, Tourism. Policy 22, Flood Risk and Water Management, looks to ensure that new developments do not take place within areas which are affected by flood risk, and that new developments do not result in flooding happening off-site. So Policy 8 is the key policy relating to rural businesses and potential diversification, as it offers support for new rural business and the expansion of new ones, and this is subject to specific criteria being met and achieved. Including that the Council will give favourable consideration to the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in rural areas. There is a preference that this will generally be within or adjacent to existing settlements. Sites out with settlements may be acceptable where they offer opportunities to diversify an existing business or are related to an existing site-specific resource or opportunity. Proposals for new tourism-related developments and the expansion of existing facilities will be supported where it can be demonstrated that they improve the quality of new or existing visitor facilities, allow a new market to be exploited, or extend the tourism season. Proposals for new tourism-related developments must be justified through a business plan. All proposals will be expected to meet all of the following criteria. A, the proposal will contribute to the local economy through the provision of permanent employment, visitor accommodation, additional tourism or recreation facilities, or the reuse of existing buildings. B, the proposal will not result in suburbanisation of the rural area or encourage unsustainable travel patterns. C, the proposed use is compatible with the surrounding land uses and will not detrimentally impact on the amenity of residential properties within or adjacent to the site. D, the proposal can be satisfactorily accommodated within the landscape and environmental capacity of the site. E, the proposal meets a specific need by virtue of its quality or location in relation to existing business or tourist facilities. F, where any new building or extensions are proposed, they should achieve a high quality of design to reflect the rural nature of the site and be in keeping with the scale of the existing buildings. G, the local road network must be able to accommodate or be capable of upgrading in order to accommodate the nature and volume of the traffic generated by the development. H, out with settlement centres, retailing will only be accepted if it can be demonstrated that it's ancillary to the main use. And I, developments employ more than 25 people will be required to implement a staff travel plan. So the location of the proposal is out with any settlement boundary defined within LDP2. To this end, the key acceptability of this proposal is a test of whether or not the proposal offers an opportunity to diversify an existing business or is related to an existing site-specific resource of opportunity. There is no existing tourism business operating at the site. The proposed holiday home is also not a diversification of the surrounding farm or any other established business in the area, so the first test is not met. The farm is within a different ownership, and based on the information supplied, the only relationship between the farmer and the applicant is by them having a close friendship. It has been suggested that the sale of the land to the applicant would assist in the farm business by delivering a capital receipt for an area of marginal farmland which is unproductive and of little value. It has also been suggested that if the holiday home was built, there would be a strong connection to the farm. There are no details within the submission concerning the financial state of the existing farm, what impact any land sale would have, or any financial details of the benefit that the holiday home would have on the farm. The friendship link between the existing farmer and the applicant would not typically be considered a justified relationship, which provides a strong diversification argument. As per the previous refusal, the applicant has indicated that they are looking to diversify their existing holiday booking business by building a purpose-built new unit on this unique site to add to their portfolio. They have suggested that the site would have exceptional marketable qualities due to its views and setting and the high standard of accommodation which will be created. It is agreed that the site's location could be taken as being exceptional in terms of its landscaping, setting and views, but this is not a site-specific resource that would only be applicable to this proposal or this particular site, and the same principles could apply to large portions of rural Perthshire. The close proximity of the development to the local road network and a train station within 3.5 miles, again, is not necessarily a site-specific resource, as there are many sites across the area that would have similar attributes. There could certainly be a link up with local businesses and activities, but again, this could occur in a number of locations. NPF4 is supportive of tourism and new development in rural areas, however, only in locations which are suitable and justified. Policy 29 is explicit in seeking to ensure that all new developments are suitably sited, and with concerns over flooding remaining, the proposal is not suitably sited, as it has not been demonstrated the site is not liable to flood. There is a lesser concern regarding the appropriateness of the landscape framework to contain the development which is proposed. Some of the boundaries do not appear to be substantial in their definition. In the event of any approval being forthcoming, consideration of the need for improved landscape and planting along some of the weaker boundaries should be considered as a conditional requirement of any permission. In isolation, the visual impact of the proposal and its layout is generally acceptable, and the single-storey design would go some way to limit the visual impact from the public road to some degree. The site is isolated, so it would not have any adverse impact on any existing residential amenity. Whilst the proposal is considered unacceptable on other grounds, in terms of the impact on the wider landscape, the proposal would be unlikely to significantly adversely affect the wider integrity of the landscape. There are no issues in terms of access or parking. The application this time has included more details in terms of a drainage strategy and how this may affect the environmentally sensitive River Tay, and subject to some clarification on certain elements, this is likely to be acceptable. In terms of flooding, SEPA has lodged a holding objection to the proposal in relation to flood risk, in relation to NPF4, and the need to assess flooding for a 1 in 200 year event plus climate change. A habitat survey demonstrates there would not be any adverse impact on wildlife, especially otters. In terms of the applicant's case, the applicant's wife is from the local area and is a friend of the farmer at Kamerisricht. It was envisaged that the sale of the marginal farmland for tourist use would complement the farm business through providing farm produce to service the accommodation and capital investment, both helping towards securing the future viability of the farm. The proposal would provide unique and high quality designed tourist accommodation in the local area and is easily accessible, being closely connected to the existing road and national rail network. This remote rural location is ideal for this level of tourist accommodation, providing a unique holiday experience which could not be appreciated in a less remote area. The proposal is in accordance with the overall aims of rural planning policy to sustain the rural population and help improve the local economy. The review site's location is exceptional with a high quality landscape setting. Along with this, the site is located next to the road and near the local railway at Rannoch Station. Proximity to transport links separates the proposal from other sites in the area and is an important site-specific resource, encouraging demand and allowing connectivity to the tourism market. The use of the site for tourism will benefit the farmer through the sale of the land and the demand for his produce in servicing the holiday accommodation. The proposal will contribute to the local community through the creation of permanent employment, as explained in the submitted business plan, and provide added value through visitor spend in the local area. The proposal would not result in suburbanisation, as the building will not be close to any other neighbouring buildings and has a good landscape framework and is self-contained. The proposed use as holiday accommodation is compatible with the surrounding land uses in this part of rural Perthshire, and there will be no detrimental impact. As indicated in the delegated report for the previous application and in this review application, it was considered that the proposal can be accommodated within the landscape at this location. It was highlighted in the business plan that there is a demand and need for this high quality type of accommodation in the area. For example, health and wellness is a huge growing industry, and the applicant feels strongly that it could offer a sanctuary for idyllic group health and wellness retreats. Businesses such as yoga, Pilates, meditation, nutritionists, masseuses, beauty therapists and chefs, to name a few, can all visit the property and offer sessions to our staying guests, and there is a significant lack of anything similar in the area. The proposal is of a high design standard, as it's single storey and self-contained, and will not be detrimental to visual amenity or the character of the surrounding countryside. There were no objections to the proposal in terms of traffic, access and parking. With regard to flooding, the site is shown to be at risk of flooding based on the SEPA future flood maps. This indicates that there is a risk of flooding from the River Gower. In response, it's clear that the area of land where the holiday unit will be sited to the north is out with the flood risk area. It is accepted that a portion of the open land to the south between the holiday unit and the River Gower will be within the 10% and 0.5% chance of flooding as identified in SEPA's future flood map. As it is a holiday unit and there is no designated and formalised garden ground associated with the holiday use, it is considered that this level of flood risk at less than 0.5% to the south of the holiday unit is not significantly adverse, given the type of use, which is not permanent residential, and that there is a significant amount of open land to the east and southeast of the holiday unit, which is not within the identified flood risk area. The farmer has confirmed in writing that there has been no flooding on this land to his knowledge in his lifetime. Along with the flood risk assessments carried out and the 2024 SEPA flood map, it is considered that there is enough empirical and physical evidence to conclude that the proposal will not be at risk of flooding from the River Gower. And they've concluded, therefore, that the SEPA holding objection is overly cautious in this case, and that the submitted flood assessment, SEPA future flood map and landowner testimony is sufficient in being able to demonstrate that the built development can avoid the flood risk area and include an appropriate allowance for freeboard. There were no other objections to the proposal from consultees and no objections from neighbours or the general public. So just in terms of other matters, which is mainly the flooding issue in particular, looking at SEPA's comments in particular, in line with MPF 4 Policy 22, a precautionary approach to flood risk should be taken by avoiding development in flood risk areas defined as land or built form with an annual probability of being flooded of greater than 0.5%, which must include an appropriate allowance for future climate change. The site is shown to be at risk of flooding based on the SEPA future flood maps, and this indicates that there is a risk of flooding from the River Gower. SEPA have reviewed the flood risk assessment dated July 2023 and note that this does not accurately define the flood risk area in line with MPF 4. A level of 211.1 AOD, which is above ordnance datum, has been taken from the SEPA flood maps. These are too high level and uncertain to be used in this way. Additionally, as per SEPA's explanatory note on the difference between their planning guidance and the future flood maps, The future flood outlines underestimate flood risk as they are based on previous climate change uplifts rather than our current climate change allowances for flood risk assessments and land use planning. SEPA therefore required that a more detailed hydraulic modelling study be undertaken to determine the 200-year plus climate change flood level at this site to allow them to determine the potential impacts. This should be used to demonstrate that development can avoid the flood risk area and include an appropriate allowance for freeboard. The applicant has been referred to their technical guidance, which provides more guidance for applicants. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll proceed to questions. I have a question possibly for Mr. Fogg, and just to clarify, given the holding objection with SEPA, if we were to proceed, my understanding is we have to refer it to Scottish ministers. Would that be correct?
That would be correct, yes.
So, Councillor Waters, any questions?
Thank you, convener. I was going to ask some stuff on the SEPA stuff, but just one small question. There's quite a lot of different information from different parties within this application, with this, but regarding the applicant who on the farmer testimony and various other things feel it's been approved, has he made any level of effort to pass that on and deal with SEPA's holding objection, given the holding objection I believe was put in 11 months ago?
No, I think for the purpose of today's proceedings, it's necessary for this LRB to proceed on the basis that SEPA are objecting to this application. There seems to be some additional information that's come into the planning officer, but it hasn't been submitted to SEPA in a form that they regard as satisfactory, sufficient for the objection to be withdrawn. That's choice of the applicant, which reasons for which I'm not aware of.
Thank you. Just a question on existing businesses and their ability to expand their businesses. And that was one of the reasons that's used in this application to justify the holiday rental getting built. Within policy, does that need to be an existing business within the locality of where the business is going to be expanded, or can somebody, holiday rental company like that could be using that as an excuse to build absolutely anywhere and whatever? And it's just to understand if has to be a locality element to that. It's expanding a business within the locality where the application is.
I may not be, I think I'm not answering directly your question, but what I will say is that the application is submitted is non-compliant with the Rural Diversification Policy 8, I think it is, because Rural Business Diversification, because that envisages it's the farmer or the landowner who is diversifying the farming unit, whereas this is a third party coming along looking to acquire severing part of the site, which is not what is provided for in Policy 8.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. I'd like to discuss the design. Of course, design is always subjective. Having visited the site, I would say this design is quite unique for the area, and on the back of that, I think you alluded to in your submission about there being minimal impact because it's a single story, and then I think, am I right in thinking there'll be sort of planting that will soften the sort of the design of this property? So there's kind of two things. I wasn't aware travelling along the Loch Rannoch on the north side and returning on the south side in the local area, similar buildings, and obviously the impact of that very geometric shape.
Thank you, councillor. The design of the building itself isn't a reason for refusal. And by that, I would assume that the planning service is happy to accept that the the very contemporary style would fit in to this particular location. I think undoubtedly the site would benefit from some additional landscaping, both from a visual point of view and from a biodiversity point of view, quite probably because of the location. I think it's alluded to that, some additional landscaping would be beneficial were the application to ever be approved. But I don't think it's to hide it in itself.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, members. With no further questions, are we able to proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Waters?
Happy to proceed, convener.
Councillor Stewart?
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Waters, if you could kick off on this one.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I will back the officers up with a refusal on this case. The expansion, existing business and new business that is not clarified and doesn't exist. So, and new businesses up their countryside in certain circumstances. So reason one, I agree with fully. Reason two, on the greenfield site is clearly a greenfield site, so there's no argument about that one. The flooding issue in the SEPA holding against policy 22 and flood risk and water management and the planning framework and policy 52 as well, and the LDP both clearly state that. So I agree fully with these reasons for refusal, and including policy item 4 and reasons for refusal as well. So I fully agree with officers on this. It's not an appropriate development in this site, and certainly the flood risk assessment and SEPA holdings thing would absolutely have to be dealt with first.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. I don't think I need to repeat. Councillor Waters encapsulated my thoughts, and I'd be minded to refuse this application.
Thank you. I think we're going to have a unanimous decision here on this one as well. A central point here is that SEPA have a holding objection. If we were to proceed in any way, we'd have to refer to ministers as referred. But in light of the other reasons for refusal, reason one is that it doesn't comply with policy 8. The fact that the field's been taken or bought from the farmer is not a diversification of the farm, and therefore it falls foul of policy 8. And obviously, again, as we've mentioned, this is a greenfield site which is not allocated within the local development plan. So reasons 1 and 2 are enough as it is, but the holding objection for SEPA is another major concern. So I'm happy to concur with my two colleagues that we refuse the appeal based on all the reasons given by officers. Another unanimous decision, Mr. Fogg. Are we okay with that? Fine. So members, we'll now move on to the last application of the day, number 46, which is a siting of 2 holiday accommodation units and associated works at Chapter House, Fossilway in Kinross. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce.
Thank you, convener. So the application site shown where the yellow star is, in between Crooked Devon, Fossaway, Yetts and Muckert as well, there right in the middle. Next slide, please. And then as we zoom in a bit closer there with Fossaway to the north, the application site is down at the bottom there with the yellow star, an existing cluster of a number of residential properties. This is obviously taken off Google Maps, which indicates a number of other businesses in the area. It does say the We Stay there, which is related to the application, and I'll explain that in a minute or two. Next slide, please. And then zooming in, the application site is part of the current residential curtilage of the existing house, chapter house there, and a number of other existing dwelling houses. Next slide. So application site boundary marked surrounded there in red. The red area to the top there is the whole boundary of the existing residential property, the existing house and the application site. And then on the right hand side there you see the red line area on the right hand side is the application site, and the remainder of the ground in their ownership in blue, which is the existing dwelling house, garage and the existing short-term let business. Next slide, please. And then this is just the application site with the access road down to all the properties that leads up to the main road. Next slide, please. Then these are the 2 holiday accommodation units are shown within the application site there, footprints of both those pods, if you like, within that area next to the existing house, using the existing access to come off the road there and come in and park where the 2 cars are shown. Next slide, please. Elevations of the pod, fairly typical of this kind of development, I suppose. Timber walls. Next slide, please. So that's some photographs. So this is the existing access onto the road, visibility in both directions, and then just set back slightly from the road there with the bins there on the right hand side. Next slide. And then as you come down towards the application site, the trees on the left hand side, and then in the right hand picture you start to come into the application site with the tree just immediately adjacent to the site, and you can just see the edge of the existing garage on the left hand side there. Next slide. So this is the application site as you view it from the road. The driveway that you can see there on the right takes you to the house with the red roof garage there. Behind that's in separate ownership. The dwelling house is in the middle of the slide. The area where the holiday units would go is just where the arrow is indicating, and then one of the other houses just to the left of the image there. Next slide, please. The left photograph there shows the existing house, and then you can see the neighbouring properties, one immediately opposite on the left hand side, and then the right photo, that's the other side of it, looking at the courtyard where the other houses are located. Next slide. This is looking from the application site to the closest residential property on the left hand side, and then on the right hand side again you can see that property, and this is the existing garage building, the existing dwelling house. Next slide. So this is the area of ground where the pods are located, which is the image on the left. The middle image is also where the pods would be located, with that driveway again to the property to the rear. And then the right hand image is as you look further up that driveway to that other dwelling house. Next slide. Again, on the left hand side, that driveway that leads you up to the other property, and then and the same on the right, and you start to see some of the other outside areas and buildings that are associated with the existing holiday accommodation business. Next slide. And this is looking further back towards the dwelling house, towards the road, and you can see where the pods would be fitted into that area there between the trees. Next slide. So this is the garage of the existing house, which has been partially converted with the benefit of planning permission to a bedroom for short-term letting purposes. So you can see the garage door for the house, and the separate door and window there are the bedroom and a toilet for the short-term letting purposes. And then some of the other development that was granted there, which include a small building, which includes a kitchen and a sitting area, indoor and outdoor, and then a hot tub and external space associated with that short-term let. Next slide. And then this is the external parking area. And then the raised bed area that takes you up to where the pods would be located. And another image of that parking area. And then some more, this is more to show you that there is some containment to the site in terms of boundary landscaping and fencing as well. So the proposal is for 2 holiday accommodation units and associated works located in the domestic garden of the house called Chapter House at Fossaway. There is fencing and planting surrounding the property, and the existing house has a detached garage within which part has permission to be used for short-term let accommodation. This includes a bedroom and a toilet, and a separate timber building contains a living area and kitchen. The outdoor area contains outdoor dining and leisure space and a hot tub. The site is within a small private rural residential development accessed from an unclassified road by a long driveway, and the application site is on the west side of the private access. The site is bound by private vehicular access to the dwelling house called Thorney Brook to the west of the site, and to the south is a private access track to Chapter House, and to the east is the main access road to the group of dwelling houses located to the south. The holiday units are 2 one-bedroom timber buildings with canopies and hot tub. To the south, accessed by steps from the garden ground, is a parking area for 2 cars. The site plan shows a hedge on 3 sides of the site and trees screening the site on the north boundary. Foul drainage is proposed through a private treatment plant in the curtilage in the northeast corner of the site, and surface water is to a soakaway within the site. So 2 reasons for refusal. Firstly, that the proposed development fails to meet the relevant criteria for countryside development to be justified, is not compatible with the private rural residential development, would have a significant detrimental impact on residential amenity, promotes unsustainable travel patterns by virtue of its remoteness from public transport options, and fails to meet a specific need by virtue of its quality or location in relation to existing businesses or tourist facilities. The proposed holiday accommodation is contrary to Policy 13, Sustainable Transport, Part B, Policy 29, Rural Development, Part B, and Policy 30, Tourism, Part B of MPF 4, and Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, Policy 9C, Caravan Sites, Chalets and Timeshare Developments, Chalets, Timeshare and Fractional Ownership, and Policy 60B, Transport Standards and Accessibility Requirements for new development proposals of the Perth and Kinross LDP2. And secondly, the proposed development is poorly designed and incompatible with the amenity and character of the surrounding residential development, and is therefore contrary to Policy 14, Design Quality and Place of MPF 4, and Policy 1, Placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP2. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, in terms of MPF 4 Policy 29, Rural Development, this aims to encourage rural economic activity, innovation and diversification, whilst ensuring that the character, natural assets and cultural heritage are protected. The proposal would not be in keeping with the character of the area and would have a detrimental impact on residential amenity due to noise and movement from the turnover of guests, loss of privacy and overlooking. The site is car dependent and is overly distant from tourist amenities. In terms of LDP2, Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, this states that the Council will give favourable consideration to the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in rural areas. There is a preference that this will generally be within or adjacent to existing settlements. Sites out with settlements may be acceptable where they offer opportunities to diversify an existing business or are related to an existing site-specific resource or opportunity. The policy further states that proposals for new tourism-related developments and the expansion of existing facilities will be supported where it can be demonstrated that they improve the quality of new or existing visitor facilities, allow a new market to be exploited, or extend the tourism season. Proposals for new tourism-related developments must be justified through a business plan. The application site is not in or adjacent to a settlement. A business plan did accompany the application, which highlights the site-specific justification, being that the site is part of the existing garden to chapter house, which is adequately contained and separated visually from the existing house. It is within a short distance of many walking and cycling paths, fishing venues, and local businesses, which could benefit from the additional tourist footfall and offer others further afield. In addition, the site has magnificent backdrops on the north by the stunning Ochil Hills and immediately to the south, Cleash Hills and Valley, which is an existing landscape designation area, and the low-key nature of the proposal should not raise any concerns. The proposed site is also along the New Heart 200 route, which has this route has a current demand and will increase in line with market trends as this route becomes more well known. In line with this type of attraction, short stay accommodation on this route will be in demand. The We Stay cabins will provide a high quality and secure environment for guests, and the location and situation of Chapter House are favourable for the extension of an existing short stay enterprise run by the applicant. The existing short-term let use was approved given the small-scale nature of the proposal and its location, and was considered the proposed use would not have an unacceptable impact on local amenity or the character of the surrounding area. No objections from neighbouring properties were received. It was also visibly contained within the domestic curtilage and immediately adjacent to Chapter House. This proposal seeks to expand this small-scale enterprise into an area of raised open ground, garden ground to the east, which is highly visible to surrounding dwelling houses, and from the access road into the private rural residential development. The expansion of this use and movement through the turnover of guests will have a detrimental effect on existing residents and an associated adverse impact on the safety and perceived safety of those residents. The intensification of the short-term let use would exacerbate the situation. The surrounding area is private residential in nature, and the introduction of short-term let uses could erode that residential character and amenity on a cumulative basis. The proposed development is incompatible with the established private rural residential development and will have a significant detrimental effect on the surrounding residential amenity. LDP2 Policy 8 also requires new countryside business proposals to meet several criteria. Firstly, that the proposal will contribute to the local economy through the provision of visitor accommodation. The proposal will provide visitor accommodation, and the business plan states that local businesses which could benefit from the additional tourist footfall and others further afield. Secondly, the proposal will not result in suburbanisation of the rural area or encourage unsustainable travel patterns. In this case, the proposal would be predominantly car dependent due to its remote location from public transport infrastructure, and it's poorly located to encourage sustainable travel for guests. Next, the proposed use is compatible with surrounding land uses and will not detrimentally impact on the amenity of residential properties within or adjacent to the site. In this case, the proposal is not compatible with surrounding land uses. The application site is in a small private rural residential development, and it will have a significant detrimental effect on residential amenity. That the proposal can be satisfactorily accommodated within the landscape and environmental capacity of the site. In this case, the proposal is poorly located in a small rural residential development, positioned on a raised open area of garden ground with no landscape screening on the boundaries, and the proposal will therefore have a significant detrimental effect on visual amenity. The proposal should meet a specific need by virtue of its quality or location in relation to existing business or tourist facilities. In this case, this is not a high quality development. The location is remote from existing business or tourist facilities, and as such, there is insufficient justification for the proposal. And finally, where any new building or extensions are proposed, they should achieve a high quality of design to reflect the rural nature of the site and be in keeping with the scale of the existing buildings. And in this case, this is not a high quality development. The proposal is poorly located in a small private rural residential development, positioned on a raised open area of garden ground with little landscape setting on the boundaries. In summary, the proposal fails to accord with the aims of NPF 4 Policy 29 and LDP 2 Policy 8 due to its poor siting and design, incompatibility with the surrounding residential use, detrimental effect on residential amenity, over-reliance on the private car and its distance from existing business and tourism amenities. In terms of holiday accommodation, NPF 4 Policy 30 Tourism, the supporting information has not specifically demonstrated any contribution to the local economy from the development, and it does not address accessibility for disabled people. The proposal is poorly sited and designed and is not compatible with a small private residential development. The development would have a significant detrimental impact on residential amenity. The site is remote from sustainable transport options and existing tourism infrastructure and is heavily car dependent. Also of relevance is LDP Policy 9C, chalets, timeshare and fractional ownership, and the relevant criterion C requires developments to meet a specific need by virtue of its quality or location in relation to existing tourism facilities. And as previously noted, the proposal is poorly designed and located, and tourism facilities and amenities are far removed from the site. It is considered that in terms of design and layout, and NPF 4 Policy 14, Design Quality in Place, that the proposal is poorly designed and located and is incompatible with the amenity and character of the surrounding area. With regard to access, the vehicle access to the public road network for the property will be via the existing shared private vehicle access into Chapter House and a number of other dwellings off the U222 public road. Parking will be provided on the site for 2 vehicles, and there are no objections to this proposal from roads. However, NPF 4 Policy 13 aims to reduce the need to travel unsustainably, and Part B requires development proposals to demonstrate that transport requirements generated have been considered in line with sustainable travel, and where appropriate, they provide direct, easy access to local facilities via wheeling and walking routes and are accessible to public transport. In terms of the applicant's case, they have stated that the site is level and it is well contained, that the neighbouring settlement of Crook of Devon has good public transport links, that there is also a good cycle network in the area. They state that the site is strategically located with easy access to the surrounding road network. The location is excellent for local amenities and activities, including Powmill Milk Bar, Knockhill, Lochleven Castle, Vane Farm Nature Reserve, and fishing, golfing and gliding nearby. The cabins are well enclosed and are small scale, limiting any visual impact, and they take advantage of the views of the surrounding landscape. They have been sited and designed to be in keeping with the area. They will provide additional accommodation for this business and will support tourism. In terms of other matters, there were 4 representations received, all objecting to the proposal and raising the following issues: that the proposal is incompatible with surrounding residential development, that increased visitors will impact on the small group of houses, that the proposal will set an unwelcome precedent which would further impact residential amenity, that the site is on a raised area of ground and the proposed development will have a significant visual impact, that the design is not in keeping with other adjacent buildings, that the proposed development would impact an existing tree in the northwest corner of the site, an oak which is 60 to 70 years old. The proposed foul drainage does not meet the required distance from a building. The proposal will encourage unsustainable travel patterns. There is a lack of public transport options in the vicinity of the site. It will lead to suburbanisation of a rural area. The off-the-shelf design is not in keeping with the surrounding area. The proposed development, including individual hot tubs, will exacerbate the current water demand issues experienced by the residential development. That there is a lack of adequate waste refuse storage for a commercial business, that it is excessively high on an elevated area of ground, there are overlooking safety and privacy concerns, road safety concerns, and noise from the users of the cabins will have a detrimental impact on residential amenity. One representation highlighted inaccuracies with the supporting information. It is noted that the site is not a hamlet as described in the design statement. The site is within a collection of rural residential properties constructed on the site of a former farm in 2008 to 2009. It also highlighted that the site is not enclosed by existing vegetation on all sides. The north boundary was planted with semi-mature woodland, which was cut down about 3 to 4 years ago. Trees were planted 2 years ago on the access drive to the north by the occupants of Thorny Brook. The adjacent building is not a summer house as stated in the supporting documents, but a kitchen and living area for the other short stay use in the garage. The representations raised issues which are not a material planning consideration, including loss of view and the shared cost of maintaining a private access road to the residential development.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to questions. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. Thank you for your presentation. It's very extensive and it's really cut off a few of my questions. But doing a site visit, I was struck by there was no other businesses other than appeared private residential homes.
Yes, councillor, as far as I'm aware, there's no other commercial businesses operating there. It's all residential properties, apart from the existing short-term let business that the applicant runs from their property.
And on the back of that, the proposed site where the 2 units are going to be placed, they'll be certainly looking into private residential housing. And on the location, they will be cutting down the visual, there'll certainly have visual impact heading out and into the house grouping.
That's clearly a matter for the LRB to decide whether they think that is indeed the case. The planning service are concerned that the area of ground where the pods are proposed is quite elevated, exposed, visually prominent, and so on. The applicant is obviously of a slightly different opinion as to whether that's the case or not. So that would really be something for you to consider, whether you think that's the case or not.
Thank you, convener. No further questions.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. Just on the size of the small settlement, or the amount of houses. My understanding is there's 9 houses, one existing short-term let type property. Is that right?
I certainly think it's 9 or 10 existing houses in the area.
Right, thanks. I'm just trying to get an idea of the proportion. The current proportion is one holiday let for a number of houses, but this would have then go, if we were minded to pass this, it would go up to 3 for some. So the amount of ratio between the amount of holiday lets to houses would increase quite significantly.
So sorry, councillor, I'll just come back. Yes, I think if there's 10 properties there and there's one commercial short-term let use, then as an overall percentage, that would be 10% of the built development is in commercial use. If we talk about there now being 12 buildings, and only 9 of them are residential and 3 are in commercial use, then you are increasing the percentage or the proportion of what's in commercial use in that residential grouping.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. I don't have any questions myself, so members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information for us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. I'm happy to proceed.
And Councillor Waters.
Happy to proceed.
Chair, happy to proceed. So Councillor Stewart, if you could start us on this one.
Yes, as we've just heard, that we 3 councillors will probably also be promote tourism and business within Perth and Kinross. However, I am going to go with the Perth and Kinross Council officers on this matter, and I would refuse this application on both the reasons 1 and 2.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stewart. I'll come next if I may. This is a residential area, obviously predominantly residential. There is a small operation for short-term lets with one of the properties. This property, Chapter House, it's within the curtilage as we've heard. It's a little side business, I suppose you could class it as, in inverted commas, a cottage industry, if you want to put it that way. But the introduction of 2 more would turn this into a commercial operation, effectively a commercial operation within a residential area. And on short-term lets, as we know, it is residential amenity, which is the most important factor here. The comings and goings of people will be intensified. That will have a detrimental effect on the residential amenity of the area, undoubtedly. It changes the character of the whole location. And therefore, on that basis, I feel I'm going to refuse the appeal, and I concur with the officer's reasons for refusal on this occasion. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, convener. I'm going to make this unanimous. I agree that protecting the residential amenity of the area is very important from the short-term let bit. So I have nothing else to add over your great summary of the reasons. Thank you.
Thank you all. Mr. Fogg, another unanimous decision on this one. Don't think there's anything else to add on this occasion. Therefore, members, that brings us to the end of today's local review body. The 6 applications have been reviewed. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, Mrs. Tierney, again, as always, Mr. Fogg, Mr. Williams on the end there. We'll see you, some of you, perhaps on the next occasion. If not, we'll see you whenever. Thank you all again today.